Because now even with Elon Musk, and I mean probably a bunch of other companies are doing it. Humanoid
Yep,
robots
yep.
that, and they're obviously gonna have brains of AI that are gonna be able to replace human bodies.
Yeah, and if we're not going to collapse into a climate catastrophe,
Mm.
that'd be the next dilemma for capitalism, without a doubt. Because once you've developed robots like Musk is working on, a couple of other firms are doing as well, the main thing they're focusing upon is degrees of freedom for the hand. Okay, and if you have a, the only reason that a lot of manual labor exists because it was too difficult to automate. You guys worked in factories at all?
Not one day in my life, no.
Oh, you've missed out.
Yeah.
Okay. I've worked in a couple of factories. Like, this is back when I was a young man, which is 50 bloody years ago. Manufacturing is much more important, even in Australia. And you can get a job in a factory doing various manual jobs. And like, I've made filing cabinets for a job using spot welding machines. I've made air vents, and I was involved in a wine factory making wine as well. And so you realize that a huge part of the work that people do is automated and simplistic. Okay? No, it's the stuff which you can automate, if only it's worth your while to make a machine to replace the human. And that then comes down to the flexibility of a machine. And most machines, pre-robots, they simply had to go from one point to another point. So unless you could make the process something which had an absolute precision to it, you couldn't use machinery for it. And one of my favorite examples of this actually was back during the financial crisis. New York Times did a piece on a factory, and there's a woman whose job was in this factory making air conditioning units, was to insert I think it's called a thyristor. No, it's not a thyristor. A coupling device. I've forgotten the actual name of it, but it's a device which just a thermocouple. It's used to work out the actual temperature. And her job is just to insert this thing in about 1,000 or 2,000 bloody air conditioning units every day. That's all she's doing. And she basically said, you don't have to like your job as long as it pays you enough to stay alive. That's exactly the sort of thing you can automate with a robot. Okay? The work I did on the wine factory, picking up bottles of wine and moving it with a robot. Spot welding, robot. So long as you don't have to have imagination in what you're doing, this can be made robotic. So all the unskilled labor that is an essential part of why workers get a job, robots could eliminate that. And then that's a huge class conflict issue, because suddenly the only reason that capitalists pay workers' wages in jobs like that is otherwise they can't make a profit themselves. If they could produce the stuff without labor, or more cheaply with machines than with labor, then all that unskilled labor would disappear. And like 50 years ago, that would have been in Western countries. Now it's going to be in places like China. So you no longer have a capacity for the vast majority of the population to get an income from labor. And therefore, the only way you can guarantee an income is if you have a society which enforces the idea of a universal basic income. So like I know a lot of MMT types are anti-UBI, and I'm not, because if it weren't for climate change, I can see the day coming when there would be no role for unskilled labor at all, and therefore the only way you could get people a job was either to make work and like a job guarantee type thing, or to at least guarantee people enough to stay alive, because what we're actually what keeps us alive is not so much our labor, it's the energy we're exploiting. Okay, and what we're really battling over is the division of the spoils of exploiting energy on the planet. And that's for that reason I'm in favor. Labor is necessary now to stay alive. Labor is necessary to produce output. But where we're going with robotics and AI and so on, virtually all of that can be done in an automated sense. And there would be no ultimate need for people to work to produce output.
Wow.
How do you think Marx's theory works into that? Do you think he saw this coming? And because it's about labor, and now we're talking about labor being completely replaced.
Yeah.
How does that?
Like Marx's work with the philosophical stuff that I discovered when I first read it. I'm not the only one. I'm the one who's probably most understood it. But another people who saw it was Rostolsky. Like there's a book called The Making of Marx's Capital, an Australian guy called Alan Oakley, who also went through a similar titled book. And Sperling, I think his name is, who's a biographer of Marx. There's only about 4 or 5 of us who really understood this issue. And a guy called Wilde, a wonderful book called Marx and Contradiction. The rest of them, and I'm going to be disparaging here, have stuck with the labour theory of value. And to hang on to the labour theory of value, they've completely ignored this philosophical foundation. That's why I think what they've done is they've thrown out the baby and kept the bathwater of Marx. So I think there's an enormous richness in Marx, which is the proper philosophical foundation for a non-orthodox economics. But to do it, you've got to throw away the labour theory of value. And therefore, I have no time for most conventional Marxists because they've preserved Marx's initial ideas, but not the giant leap he made in 1857. But with that giant leap, you get a philosophical foundation for non-orthodox post-Keynesian monetary economics. And that's what I'm trying. Well, it's one of the things I haven't worked on it much for the last 30 years because I got caught up in everything else I've done in economics. But that to me should be the foundation, the philosophical foundation of economics should be Marx's philosophy.